We're going to get straight on with this. Flight lines, art and bird migration. Why? Well, one of the reasons is that many of you will, of course, know Penny Hollow or remember the late Penny Hollow. Generously, she left a considerable amount of money to the British Trust for Ornithology. And lurking in the background, they had this project of wanting to take artists to Africa to show where the birds migrated. Our birds, well, of course, they're not our birds because they only spend a bit of time with us. So the idea is to try and make people aware of that situation. So when I spoke with them about it, we agreed that that would be perfect. She loved birds and she loved art. And so that's the reason that this book was really being able to be produced. And funny enough, it was written by a chap called Mike Toms of the British Trust for Ornithology, whose mother lives in Haslemere. So lots of connections. In fact, actually, it rather messed up my talk, because what actually happened was Mike came along and said, well, next year I'd like to do a conference for the British Trust for Ornithology in Haslemere and have some workshops, and what I'd like to do is to bring along the Society of Wildlife Artists. So if any of you would like to, next year, about May, come along and see them. They're fantastic artists. They are the premier wildlife artists of this country. So that's how it started. And why? Well, I think it's a lot more relevant now than when we even did. This was 2014 when this actually happened, and the paintings were all done. One of the reasons is if we look at what's happening, if we look at the world, you can produce as many scientific facts as you like in life. Did it do much good? Decades they knew about plastic. Decades about global warming. Anything happen? Just takes a personal something to happen. David Attenborough, that film on plastic, that little Greta Thunberg, who actually brought everyone, whether you agreed or not, it made something happen. I think old Gandhi had it right. He said, well, sometimes we look at things and we say we can't make anything happen. Well, actually, if you don't do anything, nothing will happen anyway. So you may as well go ahead and do it. And I think that was right. So that's how this book came about. And it's not as grand as those David Attenborough, etc. But it's just a way of taking things forward. So what I'm going to do, because Mike Toms is coming along and doing a much better talk than me on this, I'm going to just do a bit about bird migration, about the cuckoo, which I've been involved with at Sussex, and just a few pictures at the end, just to show you. And the other thing is, if you've got any queries as we go along, we're not a huge audience, stick your hand up or shout out and I'll answer if I can. Right. Did we think that birds migrated? Yes, we did. 1555, Mr. Olaus Magnus, these are fish, okay, being hauled out the sea. Those aren't, those are swallows. What they thought was that swallows, they disappeared across the sea. So what do? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? They go straight down to the bottom of the sea, spend the winter in torpor at the bottom of the sea, and then come back out again. Well, that was one theory. In fact, actually, even Gilbert White hung on to that in the 18th century because he just hated losing his swallows. But even better, look, Domingo Gonzalez on his way to the moon. That's the best one, isn't it? Well, they fly up. Where do they go? They go to the moon. Now, all you've got to do is to find some real friendly birds, hook onto them, and you get taken to the moon. A brilliant idea. So, during the 19th century mainly, we began to learn a little bit more. People travelled a bit more. They learned that they did indeed move somewhere. But I think, why bother to migrate at all? There's got to be a good reason. You think that 20% of the world's 10,000 odd species actually migrate. There's got to be a reason, hasn't there? And, well, I think the main reason, as I like to say, is sex and food. It's to move to where there's better breeding opportunities, where there's better food. The world is such a place. You'd be down in the Sahara, south of the Sahara, your food's running out, but you want to actually move across. These are actually, I see here some booted eagles. This is all coming across from Malta. If you ever go to Gibraltar, rather. If you ever go to Gibraltar and you happen to be in the autumn, you may see something like this. Huge amounts of raptors going across. And I think short-toed eagles as well in there.
Where would they be going?
They'll be going down to Africa. Most of those will be going down to Africa, parts of Africa, probably right down to the south of Africa. Right across Europe, right from all round there. So from Eastern Europe, some of our honey buzzards, our hobbies will be going, and other things will be, say, further east. So when did migration commence? Well, I'm not sure this is right, but this is what is supposed to have happened. As the ice began to recede, it left, or more verdant countryside appeared, so the birds followed it up. So they were always moving around, so all they did was to move further along. I'm not sure that answers everything for migration, to be honest, but I think it's a pretty reasonable thing, is that the birds did indeed start to migrate. And of course, you know, one of the things about migrating early is if you do get to the place early, you usually get the best spots and your best choice of your mates as well. And it's shown that those that get there early are the most productive. But a bit of bad weather, predation, not many leaves on anything, magpies come along, it's quite a dodgy thing. So whether or not you're going to make it is another, but if you can make it, you'll produce more young than anyone else. So that was always a good reason for it. Do you know what these are? Flyways. This is all the migrations. See them? We always think about our migration down through this area here, but there's the Pacific, Atlantic, there are some very odd ones as well, which we'll come on to, like the cuckoo. They come all the way from Asia, but most of them come down the seaboards, and actually from north to south and south to north. So right round the world, there are all these flyways. And this is ours, crossing between Spain and Morocco, and this is the Afro-Palearctic. Anyone know what the Palearctic is? Well, I'll show you. Palearctic is an area, an environmental area, which is that, and that's the Western Palearctic. So that's our birds, really. And our birds are also coming down through Italy here and crossing between Italy into Tunisia and then down into Africa. But we can see some 2 billion Northern European birds migrate south. 2 billion. And if you add in the Western Asian lot, well, I think you can more than double that, probably nearer 5 billion birds. Of ours, 25 million are shot, netted or limed, at least 20, and I think 25 million's a bit low. This actually happens to be Lebanon. These happen to be buzzards and honey buzzards. These were actually just shot for fun. So it's a really, you know, it's a difficult business. You have enough trouble with predators wanting to eat you, the weather turning against you, and then you have this. And here we are. We're in the are we in the European Union? I'd never quite work out these days. I think we presumably are. But look at that, 25 million. Let's just look at this though. There we are, Italy, in the supposed to be protecting birds. 5.6 million are killed there. France, 0.5 million. Croatia, Albania. And then of course, if we go to Cyprus, which is one of our protectorates, 2.3, I mean, I've been there and just removed nets and liming, and they've been catching them. Gibraltar, where was Malta? My geography's terrible now. Malta's down here somewhere, isn't it? Malta, so they come across, and it was quite interesting. One of the stories, because in the book, one of the things they've done is to introduce personal stories as well. And so in Malta, where they've just been fined by the EU for killing 110,000 songbirds, the police were there. Somebody who was from England trying to protect them saw this young lad shoot a golden oriole out of the sky, told the police. Police came along, there was a golden oriole, there was the gun, and the chap said, well, I didn't shoot it. They said, oh, all right, then gave him his gun back, and that was it. So these poor birds are having a hell of a time in trying to get through. And here we are, look, these are particularly good in the old pot, aren't they? We've got a blackcap, skylark, song thrush, robin, ortolan bunting. Ortolan's brilliant, 100 euros for one of those. Take its head off, roast it, and then you eat it with a towel over your head in France. Absolutely brilliant, isn't it? And robins as well. And people are trying, they're trying to sort of help. This is, sorry about the quality of some of these, but this was from the Italian League for Protection of Birds. And look, there's a little blackbird, that's liming, and these are robins going off to be illegally eaten. So it's
What liming is?
Liming, you put it onto a branch, and it's a sticky substance, so when the birds land, they're stuck to it. And then you come across, you go, and then put them in your bag. It's horrible. Another one they do is they have a brick on the ground, or stone, so the birds come under, and then they pull, and then the stone just crushes the bird, and they go and pick it out. That's another favourite of theirs. I do despair of the human race on occasions, I must say. Anyway, let's cheer ourselves up a bit and think, well, how in the hell do they do it anyway? So, well, obviously one of the ways is you lose, as we do, landmarks. So when you're flying, you know, you can see landmarks, valleys, rivers, and that sort of thing. Vector navigation, which is sort of compass and point. They could actually use their compass, which we'll just come on to slightly in a moment, and they'll just make their way to, they've worked out where north is, they've worked out where south is, and they will make their way along. The winds will knock them out of the way on occasion, so particularly young birds end up sometimes coming from America and getting it completely wrong and disappearing here. So that's one of the ways that they do it. But how do they do it? Well, they're susceptible. They understand that they know magnetic north and magnetic south. And it's believed that some can actually, with cells in their eyes, can actually see our magnetic field. Others have a slight bit of magnetite in their forehead, and particularly homing pigeons. And they, again, can detect north and south. So when they're actually flying, they're working out where they are. I find it incredible. In fact, actually, they did find magnetite in some old human skulls. Anyone here good at finding their way around? Possibly not, okay. They go and use the sun. They're saying the sun as well is another. Although the sun moves in the sky, they move with it, or they are able to make adjustments for where the sun is in the sky. They're particularly good at going at night. They will follow the constellations, and they will work the constellations out. And particularly going across places like the Sahara, they will do it at night. And I've not quite worked this one out. They can do it by smell. Now, that sounds a bit funny, but if you take something like a fulmar, which is a bird called a petrel, which is like it's a bit of a seagull, really, that can detect food out at sea, some 60 miles away by smell. So, and it's all these things come together. So there is no one thing. It's no easy. And do you know what? They have little brains as well. And yet all these things come together for them.
Can I ask you, it's not sunny, you've got a picture of what happens when it's cloudy and rainy?
Cloudy and rain, we're going to rely on the other elements to see. Now, if it's really bad, really, really bad, then they'll come down. But they can't if they're at sea. They've got to keep going. Sometimes they'll end up on a boat, you know, and they'll be really delighted to have a ride across. So they need to have all these different aspects. Because you're quite right, if it was just relied on the sun one, Well, they're stuffed really, aren't they? If you excuse my expression. So it's all of these things that come together that enable them to actually work out where to go. And when you think that if I do get my swallows back this year, and it's a bad year for them, they come back to my barn, my stable, by these systems.
Can I ask constellations, is it the brightness of the stars?
No, it's actually the formation of the stars that they can actually follow. Don't ask me how they worked it out. I haven't got to that bit yet. So there's the swallow. So when do they do it? Well, first of all, as we said earlier, they're down in Africa. It's getting hotter. The food isn't so good, and then they make their way back up to us. First arrivals get the best spots. I've had my swallows. A young buck has obviously arrived early at my stable. Found a very attractive female. Eggs, chicks, going brilliantly. Then comes along some old boy swallow. He arrives, I'm in charge of this, and I couldn't work it out to start with. I kept finding all these chicks on the ground, and I'd pick them up and I'd put them back in the nest, and I'd pick them up and put them back in the nest, and I'd come back again, and they're on the floor again. What had happened? This old chap had actually thrown them out of the nest, thrown them out, and then laid his eggs with that female. So it's quite a hairy life being a swallow. It's not all, swanning around looking good. So they will, of course, made their way up, and we've already discussed that if you get there early enough, you're more productive. And then what actually triggers them to come back again, come the autumn? Well, you've got to say that it's quite obvious in some way. It's cooling. The insects that they feed on, first of all, they're in the air, then they're no longer in the air, then they're very low. So I don't know if any of you ever walked across a field ever with some swallows running around. That's because there's no insects up there. So what they're doing, as you walk along, they push up a few insects, and they come along and they follow you and pick up those insects. So that's the time, that's the trigger. Daylight as well. Daylight begins when the days shorten. That actually triggers them. Always reminds me of anybody read Wind in the Willows, when the swallows sat on the line and they had the urge to go. Well, that also does actually happen to them as well, because with the shorter days, the urge is to go. And off they set. Another interesting thing actually is that I said that it's got, despite being able to do all this navigation, they have smaller brains, because you don't want a heavy brain when you're being chased by a hobby or a sparrowhawk or something like that. You want to fatten up before you go. You've got to fatten up before you go. You've got to have food on board, otherwise you're not going to make it all the way down to the Sahel, southern Africa. So you load up. You've been involved in other naughty things, in making sure you've got chicks and what have you. So what actually happens as you go is that the heart becomes bigger in some of the birds, not all of them. Heart becomes bigger. The muscles in the chest, the wing muscles, become bigger. The digestive tract shrinks, as do the reproductive organs. They shrink as they go along. So they adjust to make the journey. It is incredible just what actually happens to these small birds. Right. Should I go or should I stay? Now, you've all got these, I'm sure, and we've just learned from the British Trust for Ornithology, if you listen to the radio, that this is one of your garden birds these days, a very common garden bird, and it is, of course, a... Thank you. However, the goldfinch, we have their charms. They will stay with us. If it's a nice winter, not too bad a winter, they'll stay and they can find seed, and we put out seeds for them. If it's not so good or really bad, then they will just move over into down into Iberia, Spain, that sort of area. They won't go very far, but one year they'll do that, and the next year they'll stay in the UK. So they will adjust accordingly, which is, I guess, why they're so successful at the moment. And this, of course, is a black cap. Or should I just be clever? This is an Austrian southern German blackcap. He's looked at all his relatives who, if you want to, if I can, you can edit this out by the way, Will. He's looked at all his relatives completely knackered in their journey all the way down into Africa. He said, well, I'm not going to do that. What does he do? Come Oktoberfest, he says, right, I'm whipping across to England. Do you know, they feed us there. It's absolutely brilliant. So they come across. So we now have blackcaps overwintering with us in England, which we never had before. Only a very recent occurrence, this. And not only that, they're now becoming genetically set up to actually do that, and they wouldn't even dream of going down to Africa now. So quite a clever little ploy there. So they all have different strategies and different ploys. I can't quite work this one out. Now, this is a tricky one. Anybody got any idea what this is? Who said that? Judith. Redneck phalarope. This is, some of you girls or ladies might like this. This is, they breed, we've got a little smallish breeding population in the Northern Isles of about 60 to 80 pairs. What actually happens is, there's a lot of kerfuffle with the males with their ruffs round legs and whatever. They get the female, they breed, they put the eggs down, the female looks at him and said, jolly good, over to you, mate. And they push off and the male has to bring the eggs along and then look after the chicks and bring them along. So I'm sure you wouldn't want that, would you? No. Anyway, what we knew was that they did actually migrate into the Arabian Sea area. That because they'd actually been rung and they'd been found there. What we didn't know when we put a little satellite tag on it was actually a lot of hours they go across to Newfoundland, they then swing down the east coast of America, come to the Caribbean, across the Caribbean, over onto the Pacific, down the Pacific coast until they get to Ecuador. And then they spend the winter in the sea off Ecuador, and then they come back again, 16,000 miles. I'm never quite sure about that as a good strategy, but it seems to work for them. And there we can see, sorry about my picture again, a little satellite disc being placed on them. This little one weighs about 5 grams, very small. We'll have a look in a minute. One called a geolocator, which you have to catch the bird in the first place, and then you have to catch it again to find out about it. I'll come on to that. And that weighs about 0.6 of a gram. So if you imagine a metal paperclip, it's about that weight. And these things are getting smaller and smaller. It's incredible. We'll come on to those in a minute. So that's there. And this is a little bit one I've been involved with, which is the cuckoo. The cuckoo population has been crashing, certainly in England it's been crashing, although funnily enough, this year's been one of the best years for cuckoos. Those northern winds in Africa stopped a lot of our migrants. I don't know what happened to these chaps, or chapesses. They managed to make it through. Whether they had a window in the weather, whether they'd got really good feeding in their wintering grounds, I don't know. And we actually, for the first time, which I can remember, our number in England went up by about 22% this year, just this year, so we'll see what happens. In fact, actually, I've been out on, I don't know whether anyone's been to Lavington, the heathlands there, and I've actually had a cuckoo there and a cuckoo there, cuckooing at each other, and I haven't had that for years. So what we did, though, at the Sussex Ornithological Society, and it was quite a lot of money, 3,000 quid for what's called and I always have to remember that it's a platform transmitter terminal, tiny little thing, gets put on these birds, and 5 of them in 2011 were actually set up to find out where they go. And at that time, all the numbers were going down, 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 particularly in England. Where do they go? We knew that they went to Italy, which we can come on to in a moment, but we didn't know what else they did. This actually just shows, this is actually quite, sorry about the graph everyone, but it's actually quite interesting. All the red is where the cuckoo numbers are crashing down. All the blue, it hasn't made up for the crashing down here, but in the blue is they've been going up, numbers of cuckoos. Is it global warming? Is it habitat? But, you know, have we screwed up our habitat? Have we put so much pollution into the sky that they're moving north? Well, we didn't quite know. I don't know whether you know, but the British Trust for Ornithology do a huge survey right through the country every 20 years. And this was the result of that latest one. So, first of all, you're going to find out about your cuckoo, catch it. This is a chap called Chris Hewson of the British Trust for Ornithology, and he's setting up a net. And they were only put on males because even 5 or 6 grams, the males were bigger, so they only were put on male cuckoos. And there it is being placed on its back. Eventually, I understand they fall off. Having said that, I have heard of one that's been going 8 years and it hasn't fallen off. So obviously it didn't affect it either. So what are they? First of all, you've got this, well, let's do this little geolocator. This one actually is tiny, tiny, tiny. Catch a bird and you've got to catch it again. Because if you don't do that, it's useless. What you've got to do, because what actually it does, it measures, it is able to take in the daylight to work out daylight, night, time with a little clock, and work out probably to within 150 miles when you get it back, the journey that it actually undertook. Because there's a clever bit of software you just put that in and it tells you where it's been. Incredible. This is our PTT, which I've said, which is our platform transistor terminal. Try and say that when you've had a few drinks. And that's the one we've put onto the cuckoos. And this is very good. This one you don't need to recapture. You need to capture them to start with, but then you don't need to recapture them again. And they're accurate to within about 600 metres of where the bird goes. So, did you know that there is this worldwide location and data collection system dedicated to studying and protecting the environment, Argos satellite systems? In other words, a whole lot of satellites are going round used specifically for wildlife monitoring. I never knew that until I got deeply into this. So about 8,000 creatures now. So you've got a great white shark, you've got a killer whale, you've got a snow leopard, you've got our cuckoo. All these birds can be monitored by what's called the Doppler effect. Anybody know about Doppler effect? Stand in the road. There's a motor car coming, okay? See sound waves just bunching up. So what it's able to do by sending messages up and messages down is to actually work out the highest point all the time as those sound waves are. So every time it passes, what it does, it has about 10 hours of working away busily, and then it goes into, has a bit of a kip for 48 hours and recharges with a little solar panel, all in a tiny, tiny thing, mind you. Little computer, little clock, all going on there. And it is incredible because we've managed to find out so much about birds now, about migration. And the one thing we did find out about, we knew that they did this route through Italy. We didn't know where they went to. We had no idea that they did this western route down through Iberia, western Sahel, and we didn't know where they wintered, which was in the Congo, in the rainforests in the Congo. We never knew that. So we found out that by so it's only since 2011 we found this out. So these are, who have we got? We've got Chris, David and BB, which I think stands for British Birds, sponsored it. And we can see the routes that they do. Some of them come down through Italy and then end up further south here, south of the Sahel, in the Congo Basin. But what they all do, it doesn't matter whether they come down here or come down here, they all go back that way. They all go back that way. And we say our birds, but the cuckoo arrives, what, end of April? It's gone by the end of June. Sometimes it's even gone by the 3rd of June. So it's probably with us 6 weeks, if you're lucky, 2 months. It then saunters for 4 months down to its wintering grounds, and then rushes back up, because it only goes back up on the western side, and it's 2 months getting back again. And that's our cuckoos. So they really are with us a very, very short time. One of the places that they end up is I guess many of you will know, the Po Valley in Italy. I think about a third of the Italian population live in that area. And then there's the Po Delta as well, which is about 130,000 acres of wetlands and sand dunes. And that's the sort of place where the cuckoo will come along, it will get itself fed up, loves hairy caterpillars if it can find it. That's the best thing for it. From moths, which could be one of the problems with us as well. Perhaps as we don't have so many moths, as we know by our car screens, that could be one of the reasons that they have been suffering. And then they make their way down through Italy and across into Tunisia and over and down to the Congo from that route. And here's, I never remember his name, Federico Giamo, who is an artist, and he didn't go to Africa. He just went down the road to do this, but I thought it was nice. About time we had a bit of art in here, because we are talking about art and migration, aren't we? So there we are. That's where we found that they actually went to in the Congo, which is the equatorial area. What was also interesting, and this is quite I'm sorry that it's another boring thing, but the red bits mean that actually they were highly successful. These were only the birds, don't forget, that had these little PTTs on. So here, that was not many of the cuckoos from this area were very successful. That one wasn't successful at all. These were all, and all of these went down the western route. So we were losing cuckoos on the western route, whereas these, the red ones, were all on the eastern route. And this was what we found certainly up to about 2013, 2014. So it's completely obvious, isn't it? It's a disaster going down the west side, and it's brilliant going through Italy. Well, didn't quite work like that, I'm afraid. This is the latest. This is 2018, 2019. And this is up to the 20th, well, my latest information is up to the 20th of May, I've got. So I don't know what happened to this. I don't know what happened to this little chap. I think this was Raymond. Raymond actually decided to have a little bit of a trip out to the Verde Islands, and then why not sit in the middle of the Sahara Desert for a while? You can remember they got across this Sahara Desert. 6 times the size of, no, more than that, of France. Huge area. But of course, having said that this was a disaster and this was brilliant, what actually happens from this lot that have been actually had their satellite discs attached? Well, one goes down there and the rest of them are on this route. But so, as always, life is not that easy. They've changed their strategy for some reason. Something has happened to make them think, it's a better route that way. I'm not sure what, but completely messed up the British Trust for Ornithology. We're about to write a large paper about, the western and the eastern routes. Completely cocked it up. At the moment, there's been 14 was done for this year, and 8 of them have come back successfully. Which is good news overall, because you do lose them. Some shot, some just die natural causes, and some of them probably just fall off. So part also of this is, believe it or not, they actually come from China and come to the same area, just slightly down. Ours will be there, and the Chinese ones are here. So that's a hell of a journey, isn't it? So they're actually being monitored by people from Birdlife International and the British Trust for Ornithology. They've come from there. So quite a journey. So the Chinese aren't just eating everything, they are making a bit of an effort. So that's really about the cuckoo. a little bit about migration itself. And now we can just have a look where these artists went. 4 of the artists, Bob Greenough, Bruce Pearson, Esther Tyson and Greg Paul, they went to Senegal on the Sahel, on the western, just to find out where are migrants. Because once you've come across because the Sahel, let's see if we can, what's this one? Yeah, here we are, here's the Sahel, here. So you've come across the Sahara, and what you need to do if you're going to go on down here, or even further south, you need to get your food back on board. So it needs to be an area where you stop off. Other places, in fact, they will spend, other birds will actually spend the winter in this area here. Let me just, that's right. So this is where the artists went. Dialdi National Park there, which is about, yeah, I'll show you a picture of that one in a minute. And then inland as well. The Sahara is a very semi-arid grassland, scrub, small trees, suffers really badly from droughts because you've got the I think it's interzonal area, and it's the winds, it's the trade winds. And if it gets it wrong, and they don't get much rain, in an average during their moonson, which is May through to September, they only get up to 600 millimetres, and we are likely on occasions to get 10 millimetres in a day here. So they don't get a lot of rain. And one of the problems is with agriculture and that sort of thing, and we'll have a little look at, here we are. So this is a nice spot. This is the Dialdi National Park, which is about 16,000 hectares. It's a delta area. About 1.5 million birds spend the winter here. Some African, many of them are ours, like sedge warblers, little yellow wagtails, things like that will spend the winter here. And this is a typical Sahel scene. The problem with the Sahel now is irrigation. It used to be full of little pools and places they could stop off, feed up, lots of insects, and be brilliant. Irrigation, that's taken a lot of the water away. They've been cutting a lot of these trees down anyway for firewood. Overgrazing. So of course you're suffering from desertification is beginning to happen because you're joining the Sahara. It's getting very, very tricky for the birds when they come down. Every now and then, if the rain's really, really right and they get extra rain, it's okay, but if not. But there was a 250-year drought, 1450 to 1700. What in the hell happened to our birds during that period? I have no idea. 250 years before the rains came back again. It's the only hopeful thing I've ever heard about climate change. So it's, and of course it's an area for famine, it's an area of religious terrorism. You've got countries like Sudan, Niger, Mali, all in there, Burkina Faso, where there's been problems. So it's very difficult to get in there to do any monitoring as well. So it's not the best place actually to have stopped, but it's where you do stop because you've gone across the Sahara. You're exhausted going across the Sahara. And when would you think the best time is to go across the Sahara as a small bird? You've got all that size, a huge size, night or day? Both. A lot of them will do it all in one hop at night and use the stars because it's a cooler for them. Having really, as long as they've had enough food on the north, that they've got it from Spain, Morocco, that sort of area. Some of them though will just come through on the day, and when it gets hot, they just come down to the ground, just stay quiet on the ground, and then when it cools off again, they're up and away. So again, they all have rather different strategies for getting across the Sahara. And this is, well, yes, it's easy to say. I was going to say what bird's this, but I've noticed it says it at the top, a whitethroat. A whitethroat, actually, and this was in 1969, 4/5 of our population never came back because of drought. Completely wiped out. Even now, we haven't got back those numbers, but they are coming back. In fact, I've got one just in the field below me, shouts at me each morning. It's lovely. It's a little bird, scratchy little song, throws itself in the air and back down again. I'm sure many of you will have seen it. Yeah, it was the drought killed them. Also, not just them, but sand martins and sedge warblers, those little ones. Sedge warbler, funny little bird that makes a lot of noise next to reed warblers in reeds and ponds and whatever. Very scratchy sound. We lost a huge amount of the population. But sand martins are not doing very well. Sedge warblers are not too bad. They've managed to come back. So it's not all gloomy. We do get birds coming back. So let's just have a little look at the artists. This is Bruce Pearson, and they do work in the field. Well, in this case, the Sahel. Here he is working away. And that was what I remember seeing that at the Male Gallery, one of his pictures. I think he was very brave in doing that one. And right, this is the time. Anybody good on birds? Judith, down to you. What's this? You're under pressure now. Sorry about this. Well, I reckon that one is a marsh harrier. That one, blue-cheeked bee eater, because it's green. Well, that's obvious, isn't it? What's the matter with you all? And there's a little, I think that's a redstart, but it's so small it could be a black redstart. I can't really see. And they spend a lot of time in that the Gialdi area because not only do the land birds come down, of course, but the seabirds come down as well, and they migrate. And these are little storm petrels here coming down, and these are sandwich terns. Anybody seen sandwich terns in the UK? Yeah. Good. If you go to Rye Harbour at the moment, there's one hide which the warden took me to. He said, I said, look, I've seen so many sites, it's not going to be that good. He opened it, and there's a small island about from here to the gentleman there in the glasses, and it's got about 150 sandwich terns sitting on there nesting. It's an incredible sight. If you really want to go and see it, do it sooner rather than later at Rye Harbour Nature Reserve. This is Ospreys. This is another picture, drawing by Bruce Pearson. Of course, the ospreys that we see that come migrate up and down, huge migration that they do, and they're actually really worldwide ospreys. And although they're quite rare with us, years and years ago, when I was a young man, I was stuck on the Amazon in a canoe. And as we went down this offshoot of the Amazon called the Yahari River, every 100 yards during the winter there was an osprey fishing. So we'd just come down every 100 yards, every 100 yards. So that was the American ones, and these are our UK ones. This is another picture by Bruce Pearson. I won't be mean to you that. I think that's a black-spotted cuckoo, and that I'm pretty sure is a black redstart. Black redstarts used to nest. They were really pleased after the Blitz when all those old buildings were in London, and they all nested in London. A few nest now back on the coast, but not many with us. This is really sad. This is Greg Poole. Within the last year, probably a half year, he died. One of the artists. Very nice chap, really quite sad. He was a little more impressionistic, as we can see, because I think that might be a turtle dove, and that's definitely a wheatear there. And that's a sand grouse of some species, and that I think has to be, well, yes, it's a I think it's alpine. Because of the way it's set up, an alpine. I don't think it's a swallow, but when you do impressionistic pictures, it's a bit tricky to tell sometimes. And here's Bob Greenoff. He's a Sussex man. If you go to Rye, by the way, as you come up and drive up to the Rye, to reserve, there's a little tea shop on the right, and his brother has it, and all his paintings are there. And he does some really nice paintings, Bob. This is a nice one of the Sahel. And here we got Wheatia, yellow wagtail, cattle egret, and I can't tell you what that is. It's a swallow or martin of some sort, that one. Terrible photograph, because she refuses to be photographed, this one. Esther Tyson, she was there, and she's coming down as to do with the workshops next year about artwork and showing how she does her work. So we're looking forward to seeing her. She's much more impressionistic. Now, I've got to say that didn't look very good. That's a Wheatia, and I've got a sparrow of hers, which was terrible close up, but every time I walk back from it, it's absolutely brilliant. It's got it off to a T. So might not be everyone's cup of tea, but they're so variable. All these artists, these are only a very, very small. I have got the Flight Lines book up there if anyone wants to have a finger through it, because next year there will be a lot for sale when the BT hold their conference. And this was at the Mall Gallery when, literally 2014, when they came back with all the pictures. And because once a year the wildlife artists have exhibition at the Mall Gallery, always worth going to if you're at all interested in it. HRH came along. I didn't realise that he was coming along, so I had to rush off and get a tie pretty quickly, and introduced us to Bruce Pearson, Bruce Pearson, that was artist, Bob Greenoff, the artist there, can't remember his name, from the British Trust for Ornithology, Andy Clements, who's chief honcho at the British Trust for Ornithology, and HRH. So I had turned up, and if anyone's heard this story, I apologise. So I'm standing there, not realising we were hauled in to do this, because it was off in an annex area. So he went down to the artist and said, "Well, what do you do?" I said, "Well, actually, I'm a bit of a fraud. I sort of help with the financing of this organisation." "Oh, you're not very interested in birds." I said, "Well, actually, I'm president of the Sussex Ornithological Society." He looked at me and said, "Oh, well, we all have our crosses to bear." And this is also one of the artists that will be coming here, Harriet Mead, who makes wonderful sculptures out of just scrap metal. Absolutely, and she's president of it, and she will be here as well. This one was actually, I was interested in it, but Chris Packham bought it, damn him. And finally, I would just say, you may or may not have heard of this lot, the Birdlife International. If ever I sort of stopped about 20 lots of societies I seem to be a member of, this would be the last. This organisation is an umbrella organisation. All of these little things are countries, are the societies and the people in country working to save birds. And the Birdlife International, which actually started here with the help of, in the UK, with the RSPB, and in fact a chap who was a very wicked property developer I happen to know, who didn't want anyone else to know he was a wicked property developer until I bumped into him in London with Birdlife International, was one of the people who used to go out and involve these organisations to become part of BirdLife so they could be supported in the help, to help birds. Because the big thing is, we come along and say, I'm in charge now, will you go and do this, this and this? And you say, Whereas in fact, the best thing is, look, I'm working on the ground, I'll do it, I know people, I know my area, and if I need a help, I'll come to you for help and guidance. And of course that works because you involve the local population, and particularly in Africa and Asia, it's worked a treat. It's a fabulous organisation, that. And I think that is the end of the talk. So thank you all very much for coming along. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think you asked most sensible questions on the way through, but if anyone's got any other questions, please do answer. And that's Carrie Ackroyd, by the way. She's another artist coming. So, thank you.